Good to see you too, Kyle. What's going on, man? How are you?
Doing great. Been a good Friday so far. We hit that 10K goal. This is awesome.
Yeah, I know. This feels like we're just cruising now,
Yeah,
right? No pressure on us. We're the first ones. We're over the cap now.
it's
We like it.
autopilot now.
Yeah, autopilot. That's right. So, like Nick said, who better to talk projections than me? Really, just king of projections. I'm just kidding. I am not the projection guy at all. That is why Derek and Kyle are here to lead us through the discussion about projections here. And the first thing I want to ask you guys, and of course, Carty, MLB, NFL, fantasy and betting analyst, ESPN, Roto Grinders, EV Analytics. He's all over the place. Kyle, you are the director of data analytics and research. If you guys were unfamiliar, just so you guys know where to find these guys' work, obviously Twitter handles in the bio there. So, Carty, what sparked you making your projection system? What was the catalyst to you doing your own projections? Was it seeing other projections and saying, I think I could do this better? Was it just something that you've always been obsessed with? How did you get started?
Yeah, so at the time I started making projections, there really wasn't a whole lot of them out there publicly. So that had a lot to do with it. I was getting my ass kicked in my fantasy leagues by my friends in high school. So that definitely contributed. And I just thought it was cool. I was like, all right, so I'm using math now to analyze baseball. I'm not losing as much in my leagues, but I want to do really, really well. Why don't I try to make my own projections? How hard can that be? And turns out very hard, but also very fun. And yeah, so that's kind of where it started. At the time it was kind of like Marcel and Sean was a system. This was before Steamer. I think Zips might have been around back then in Pacoda, but like it wasn't what it is now. And then when DFS started, that's kind of when I was working on it for season long for so many years. And then once DFS started, I'm like, all right, I got to buckle down. I got to get this done because there's nothing for that. Like I was the first one out there. And so that was really kind of the catalyst too.
Love it. Kyle, when you look at projections, were you like, man, Carty's all wrong here, I got to make my own? Is that what inspired you to make your own projection system?
No, not at all. If anything, like coming into it, like Derek was saying, like he was in kind of early and now I feel like I'm relatively late. It's kind of intimidating, honestly, to see like you got your Pacoda, you got the bat, you got Zips, Steamer, all that good stuff. But just talking to Nick, we've got a bunch of really cool information. We've got our pitch level data. And so now that, that's a fun new toy that kind of by definition, no one else really has. And so we've seen, I've seen in the background, like, oh, this is actually pretty useful. Some of this stuff is sticky year to year and can help boost kind of that predictability. But similar kind of origin story to what Derek was saying of just like started playing fantasy baseball with some buddies of mine, was just not doing as well. I'm very competitive. So I was just like, I can't keep getting like third place every year. And so I started seeing these projections and then kind of tweaking them myself or coming up with like, okay, here's like my X stat for this. And then here's like, oh, here's how I combine these other things. And then now this year is like the first year, like fully fledged PLV backed projections. We had kind of a more or less like a beta trial last year, which was good. It did pretty well, but it was, on the back of Ariel Cohen's ATC projections with some PLV flavor. But I'm excited this year for it to be fully in-house.
Yeah, I bet.
The most interesting part of that I heard was that you were finishing third in your leagues before projections. I would have killed to finish third.
Carty was over there dragging up the rear, donating every single year.
Every year.
Yeah, I got to get better at this. I understand. Well, let me ask you this, guys. How long, and we'll start with you here, Carty. How long did it take you to be comfortable with your projections when you were making them, where, you did it the first year, maybe some things, obviously you adjusted. I know there's adjustments that are made every year, but how long was it into the process until you felt comfortable with the numbers that you were creating?
It wasn't really.
Or do you still not feel comfortable with the numbers?
I feel comfortable. Yeah. No, it was pretty early on, honestly, because like I said, DFS was in its infancy. That's where I kind of released it before I put out the season long version that everyone knows at Fangraphs now. it was just strictly DFS, and no one was doing projections at the time. And so it was an ATM. Like, it was just just making money hand over fist, like just winning constantly, because no one had any idea really what they were doing. Like, everyone knows now, like, Coors Field, people are going to hit well in Coors Field. Like, people didn't even know that back then. It was like, so yeah, it didn't take too long. It definitely helped kind of winning a little bit. It helped once, you know, they started putting out, you know, accuracy contests, and the bat would like show up doing pretty well in them. And like that definitely gave me confidence. And I think I just gained confidence along the way too, because I worked with so many smart people when I was building it. You know, I was working with Hardball Times and Baseball Prospectus at the time, and I was working with so many really smart people that I was learning things from, and methods, and like how to do certain things. A lot of these guys are now, they're working for clubs, they're making decisions. So yeah, I just kind of had confidence that my methodology was good, and then the results wound up being good right away. And so I was kind of just like, all right, maybe I'm onto something.
That's great. And the only reason I framed it that way is because I do a show called CFB Winning Edge with my friend Nick Allen, and he makes college football projections. And he will tell you he is not always comfortable with the numbers. His is for betting lines, though. He's not always comfortable with the numbers because he'll feel in his heart, I don't like this number, but that's just for a weekend. That's not for a season. You know what I mean? So he'll fight with himself over adding things, taking things away. So I've kind of seen some of this process unravel in the background as well. But his numbers are still really good. And he's in those accuracy rankings for college football now, and he is moving higher and higher up the list every single year. Kyle, the same question for you. You know, you said beta testing last year, you were really impressed with what happened. And are you comfortable now with your numbers? Are there tweaks that you're still making? I mean, what's your level of confidence in your projections?
Yeah, I think it starts out like I'm feeling good about it. I don't know that I'm quite like, you know, fully like, oh, I got this in the bag, this is fine. But and I think that's kind of part and parcel with, this is the first year we're doing it full fat PLV projections, that we don't have the training wheels that we kind of had last year. And so it is a little bit like sink or swim. I mean, version 1's out, version 2 I'm going to have out by the end of the month. And I'm already making like a bunch of different tweaks like this whole time, because this is kind of like the first official year of the PLV projections. And so I want to make it as good as possible. And so right now, that's a very iterative process. I'm getting a lot of feedback, you know, what looks right, what looks doesn't, and why. Because sometimes, you know, that's half the fun of it, is like, this is weird. This is different than everyone else. And if I can back that up, like, that's cool. Like, I'm different. And, you know, I want to plant my flag sometimes. That's what makes it interesting, is like, I think that's always one of the debates kind of about these projections, is like inherently they're projecting like a median outcome. So like the most accurate is generally going to be for most of the league, but especially like at the elite end, like the guys who are going to win you your league or your first round picks, like those are a little bit harder. And so I think it's always fun when you get some variables or some values that like don't quite make sense. But if you have a good, you know, process that, okay, I feel like I'm comfortable putting it out there, knowing that like, yeah, there's a chance I may be wrong, but it's also like at this point too, you're always trying to learn. Like, I'm sure, you know, his projections perform super well, but I don't think Derek's are perfect. Like, I think every year that there's something like, okay, this didn't work, or, you know, some sort of systemic thing that popped up that like, okay, for next year, I got to tweak this, change this, or, you know, maybe this thing that I thought was really cool doesn't work, you know, and you just got to axe it. So it's just going through that process right now and keeping that in the back of my mind that like, of course I'm trying to make it as accurate as possible, but I always kind of benchmark against some of the other ones that are out there, and it is projection season. So seeing that like, yeah, ATC came out, Zips, they were doing the team previews, and I think they're fully out like today or soon or something. So just trying to sanity check and see like, okay, I line up on some guys. Okay, here's a guy I'm different on, but I have an idea of why I'm different on him, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's such a fun part of the process. Like identifying, okay, like, what do I think I'm missing? Let me study that and see if it's something that can make this better. Okay, why am I different on this guy than everybody else? Like the flag planning point that you made, I think is great, because I mean, yeah, to an extent, a lot of projections are going to be similarly accurate. But if you can be similarly accurate and significantly different, I think that has value too. So it is cool when you can find guys like that.
Yeah, and you got to give it your own little flavor, of course, too. So, and Carty, we've had you, Welsh and I have had you on, I think 3 years running, and I feel like every year it's like, all right, Carty, is this date gonna work? And you're like, one more week, just a little later, give me a little more time.
The amount of questions I've been getting since the start of the month is just overwhelming, and I'm like, probably another week or two.
Football season's over. Everybody wants these numbers now, Carty. Let's go. It's baseball season now. Come on.
It's gonna be next week, guys. It's gonna be next week.
Next week, you guys. Next week. Don't worry about it. But Carty, how many adjustments do you make from year to year? I've asked you this on my show before, but just so everyone here can listen, like, what are the tweaks that maybe just give us a couple examples of the tweaks that were made this year? And obviously you've done it for years and years, so they're less tweaks and they're less impactful, I would feel, every year, outside of the major rule changes like stolen bases and all of the new things that are happening. No more sticky stuff. Obviously lots of adjustments have been made recently. So what goes into that on a year-to-year basis, and what would change this season?
So because I do so much like daily stuff between DFS and betting and whatnot, like I'm into it like all the time. So it's not just like an off season thing for me. Like I'm making adjustments constantly throughout the year as I'm noticing things. This off season specifically, I haven't done a whole lot, mostly because I've been working on kind of the big upgrade, which is basically like my own kind of spin on PLV, like a pitcher stuff kind of thing that gets baked into the projections, which I've been talking about for 7 years now, and I still have never finished. So hopefully that happens at some
next
point.
Week, guys. Next week.
But yeah, so a lot of the time has kind of been focused more on that. And then I guess if there's anything that's really been tweaked, it's more just like reviewing kind of what my expectations for the rule changes were last year, and maybe just like tweaking them a little bit. Like before last year, the way MLB classified shifts wasn't the same as they're classifying them now. So like going back with the new classifications and kind of redoing it and that kind of stuff.
Kyle, same question for you. Like, obviously Carty's been doing it for a long time. What adjustments were made this year? And do you see yourself, are you making adjustments in season as well? Is it more in the off season? How do you do it?
Yeah, the process right now is going to be, get it as right as we can this off season, and then in season have it more update with new data as it comes in. That's still like that particular like PLV data that we have, rather than trying to change the process. So it is kind of like set it and forget it a little bit, at least right now. I can always change my mind maybe at the All-Star break and do some tweaks then, but at least, for our web dev, our database team, I don't want them to start sweating that they're gonna have to make daily changes right now. But yeah, and I mean, I kind of already touched on it that since it's the first season out, that's kind of the fun of it, is like everything can change right now.
Yeah.
Even just compared to last year, like how I'm incorporating the actual PLV stats that we have into something that is more predictive, kind of more forward facing. What's sticky, regressing things. Last year, we just kind of gave like, here's the value, and then like projected out from there, versus now I'm incorporating a lot more of like our underlying metrics. Like, okay, well, how often was he supposed to get swinging strikes instead of how often did he get swinging strikes? Things like that. And then, in addition to like those kind of process level changes, I'm also like feature engineering, trying to come up with new things. And so one of the ones that was big this offseason, and I touched on it a little bit in my presentation on Wednesday, was like I have a particular flavor of park factors. So I can actually look and I have estimates on like, okay, Coors, like we were saying, has, an elevated run rate, but how does that affect pull heavy righties? Or how does that affect spray heavy lefties? That kind of thing. And so I have a better idea of, okay, he's playing his home games in this park and, an average distribution of the rest of them. So like, okay, that's going to bump this, it's going to drop that. And then same process for pitchers. There's less kind of a control that the pitchers have over kind of spray really, but there's still like some, you just got to heavily regress it. But yeah, it's kind of right now is just a bunch of like fact finding. I'm on Twitter all the time. I'm reading through like all the articles. It Baseball HQ, Baseball Prospectus, Fangraphs, The Athletic, our authors on Pitcher List. Like, I'm just going through everything I can. And like, if anything seems like it could be helpful, I'm like, okay, let's see if I can fold that in and let's see if it helps anything. Let's see how it changes anything. So right now it is kind of just daily, like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks and what makes it, that incremental bit better.
And I asked you guys to give me maybe a couple questions. And Kyle, you wrote this one. And Derek, I want to start with you on this. Understanding what isn't in projections. What is not in projections? When we look at it, there's a lot encompassing here. I know I asked you about umpires before, and you said you have data for umpires, of course, in there as well, which I always found interesting. What isn't in there? What is something that either it's just too variable or something that you just choose not to use? What is not in your projections?
Well, it's not that I choose not to use it. I've been working on it for 7 years, but pitcher stuff is not in there yet.
Next week. It's coming next week. We got it.
Next week. Soon, hopefully. But yeah, this is actually a great question. I think it's one of the things that I talk about a lot is that if you're going to use projections, which obviously you should use projections, don't be dumb. But if you're going to use projections, understand what and what does not go into the system that you're using. And so I try to be as transparent as possible about what goes into my systems, what does not. Right now, stuff does not go into it. It will hopefully at some point in the next week to 7 years.
Somewhere in that time frame. That's
somewhere in there. Yeah. But yeah, a lot of times people will say to me, well, why doesn't the bat like this guy? He's got a great barrel rate. It's like, well, the bat's considering that. It's considering lots of things. So like some projections, a lot of the ones that have been around a while, like they're not using those StatCast type stuff yet. And that was one of the big advancements a few years ago when I put out the Bat X and it started using that stuff. So like if you're using, I don't want to name anyone because I don't know for sure, but if you're using someone else, make sure you know whether or not that's going in there or not before you try to consider it. Because if you're using the Bat X, it's already in there. You don't want to double count it.
Yeah, Kyle, say obviously the question that you threw out here, what do you not have in the projections?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of the beauty of all the different projection systems is there are a lot of philosophical differences, and it's not necessarily that one is right or one is wrong. It's just like how we chose to approach this particular problem. And so I know like my process right now is I'm basically just estimating like a single value. So I don't really have like upside or downside like variance right now. And that's, one of the things that's like on my docket, but it just didn't make the cut kind of for this version of it. And so kind of variance is like one of the things that is like vastly interesting to me, but it's not something that I have in there right now. And then
could you talk about, I'm curious what you mean by variance, because you mentioned before about, having to regress pitcher spray tendencies and stuff. So what do you see the difference between variance and I guess what you're dealing with regression?
Yeah, I mean, just like the confidence interval, like here's what I think, and here's like the upper band, here's the lower band. And, for guys with a huge track record, that's going to be a lot tighter. You're going to have a lot more confidence kind of in, yeah, they've shown us these skills over enough of a sample versus your guys like your rookies, your relievers, those kind of players, or like international players who don't have MLB experience, that like those error bands are going to be a lot wider. And it's like the highs may be higher, but the bottom may drop out. And like someone like an Elly De La Cruz is like a great example of that, of like, he's got league winning upside, but he could also just crater that strikeout rate and be in the minors for half the year. And it's just like, that's, an easy, huge variance player, but every player in the league has some level of variance. And so just getting that idea, because that'll help you, tailor your draft strategy. If you take a lot of those big swings early, maybe you go for floor late, or vice versa, that if you feel like you've got stable production at the start, maybe you take some of those like, well, if he sticks in the majors, he's going to mash, but he may flare out. So that's kind of what I mean by variance. And that's like something with the style of regression that I'm doing that like, I just don't have an estimate for that, but it is something of like, even if it's just doing like a baseball HQ, like A through F scale of like, this is how likely I think he'll make this, or, that kind of thing. But yeah, that's one of them. And then Derek, speaking to yours, that like a lot of it is built on kind of the DFS, like daily side of it, that you have a lot of like, who's umpiring that day? What's the defensive alignment? What's, X, Y, and Z? And like, I definitely don't include umpires. Like, I don't have that because I'm just doing season long.
On the season long level, like you can't even know. There's no way.
Projecting umpires sounds like the
umpire might retire in the middle of the year. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's that is a daily thing for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, things like that. Even like, I mean, I have lineup estimates that are like on the aggregate across the season, but it's not quite like, okay, here's this guy in a lineup. Here's how he affects the defense behind that pitcher. Like, I don't quite go like dig down as much maybe as that. Like, I keep it a little bit higher level as far as like defensive projections. Is it's just like, okay, here's what I think on the team level, and that's roughly based on, you know, player playing time, but like, it's not, okay, who's going to play where, how often, like that kind of thing. So there are a lot like more granular things that like I always look at and see like, okay, that's interesting, but like, I just don't have it yet. Or like one of the big ones that I don't really have right now, we're working on it, is like weather. So like, you know, summertime games, gonna have a little bit more offense, you know, same thing, inverse for the winter games. And like, so that'll affect your park factors, places in warmer climates versus colder climates. Like, that'll change things a little bit. And that's not incorporated right now. We're just getting kind of a process that we like to incorporate that kind of atmospheric conditions, and even things like, okay, well, how often is the wind blowing out and when's it blowing out? Like that kind of thing. So these are all things. And, you know, some of it I'm choosing not to, just because like, I don't know how helpful it'll be. So like, that's the umpire thing, is like, I'm just dismissing out of hand. There may actually be something to glean from that, but I just frankly don't want to try it right now. And then there's other stuff that's just like, you know, lack of time, or like, I'm honestly like lack of technical ability too, of like, if I don't think I can do this, or I don't think I can do this in a helpful way, you know, by the time these projections come out, like, I'm going to put that on the back burner. That's, you know, that's an off season. That's an, you know, mid-season kind of problem to deal with.
I'm sure perfecting the weight of stuff like weather and umpires is a very inexact science as well. So, but yeah, it's very interesting. How do you guys use your own projections, Carty? Like, do you take them at face value on a day-to-day basis? Do you bake in context? You know,
I take them at face value, and I call anyone who disagrees with them an idiot. That's
yes. I know that's your Twitter persona. JK, everyone. It's just but yeah, when Kyle was talking about the baking in for upside, I was thinking, don't worry, Carty's never had an argument with not enough upside on a projection for a minor league player ever. So it's just not something that comes up. Obviously, it does come up every single year. But yeah, how do you use your own projections? You know, whether it is season long, day to day, because most of my projections, you know, the way I use it is before the season and just comparing against the other players. Do I think this guy is going to be in line? Do I think this is conservative? Do I think these are the right numbers? You know, that's the layman's way of using them in my drafts. Like, okay, you know, if I'm splitting hairs, I will go look at projections and I will say, all right, both these systems or these three systems think this guy is going to be better. I'll take that guy. That's basically how I consume projections. It's not very complicated. I'm a dumb guy. So, but Carty, how do you use yours on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking season long, it's very straightforward. I plug them into an auction calculator. I get a list of values, and that's like 95% of my process. Beyond that, obviously, you want to consider auction dynamics and the depth of positions, and like, you don't want to fill up too early at certain spots if there's going to be better value later, and like all that kind of stuff. But in general, I tend to believe the projections for the most part. There's occasionally, stuff that I think maybe it's a little off on, a guy I don't want to be as aggressive on, that kind of thing. But for the most part, most things, stuff excluded, that I think matters is already in there. So I'm not overthinking it too much.
Yeah. And you've already done the legwork, I would assume. So it's like, trust my work I've done. You know what I mean? So and that I do understand, even as a dumb guy. Kyle, same question for you, obviously. How do you use your projections on a daily basis here?
Yeah, same kind of thing. Just like I have, we're going to have like our auction calculator on Pitcher List, and my projection is going to feed that. And I'm sure I'm going to use that a lot. Kind of my past usage has just been like, honestly, just looking at Twitter and seeing like beat reporters, things like that, and maybe like making minor playing time adjustments, especially once we get into spring training. You know, if a guy looks like he's going to make it, or somebody reports like, oh yeah, he's actually going to be, you know, the third starter, or this guy's going to be, you know, he's looking like the closer. They're talking about him in the closing role, that like I might kind of tweak things on my end, but like that's not a process that I want to apply to projections. I mean, outside of if, you know, if Jeff Passan's tweeting something, like, yeah, I'm going to fold that into the model for sure, because what he says is gospel. But like outside of that, anyone else is just like, I'm going to, you know, do what I can, take it with a grain of salt, or even just like have kind of like guide, like if I see an article that's interesting about a guy, like maybe I'll flag him as like, you know, in this tier of player value, like maybe have him be like at the top of that tier, like kind of like very minor stuff. I'm not doing like huge swings in value, but I do try and add like personal preference. And then I also, you know, where I can, like in home leagues, it's kind of easy to pull up like your league history, and you can kind of be like, okay, you know, saves go for a premium here. Rookies, you know, have this extra value here. What are the thresholds I need to meet, and, you know, various stats to do well. And I love folding that in. But then when you get to like more higher stake stuff where you may not know the preferences of everyone there, that it does help to just like, okay, here are the dollar values. Maybe I'll build in something that is like a roster tracker, so I can like do drop downs and update it live of like, okay, you know, Nick's team has these 3 guys and here are their stats, so here's where I compare to them, and like have that for the league. But that's like, I mean, that's on like the try-hardy extent of it, of trying to like track what all of the other leagues are doing. That's the most for sure.
Is the playing time the most difficult thing to figure out, just by far?
Yeah,
I don't even try to do it. I just say ATC, Fangraphs, tell me what you got. That's what I'm using. Like you can't do it quantitatively well at all.
It's impossible. It feels impossible.
You need the manual component. You need people following the beat reporters and knowing who's going to play and what the roles are. And, you know, I don't have the time or the desire to figure all that out myself. I trust other people too, and that's good enough for me.
They do. So like in the NBA, they do, I think it's per 38, you know, something like that, like 38 minutes of playing. Is that something that, is there like if a guy played 162, do you have that? I'm obviously not the biggest projection guy, but do you have like if a guy played every single game, this is what we'd expect his numbers to be? Do you have that as well?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the way the bat works is it projects everything on a rate basis. So if the guy gets, you know, 1 plate appearance and he's projected for, you know, a 20% home run rate, well, he's got 0.2 of a home run. If he plays, you know, 600 plate appearances, then it's whatever that math is. I'm not
right. I got you. Yeah, right.
But yeah, like it's very easy. You just scale it to whatever the playing time is going to be.
Okay.
Yeah. Same thing on my end. And like, you know, I do strikeout rates. So you can like, how many batters is this pitcher going to face? What's his strikeout rate? That's his strikeouts, like that kind of thing for the year. And that's something too of like kind of tying it back into like, how do I use projections? Once you get into like those later rounds, like the more of the guys who are like nothing burgers or extreme dart throws, that it's like, I might do something like, okay, if I prorate his stats to 600 plate appearances, or if I give him 120 innings, you know, what does that look like? Or, you know, how does that look? And some guys are still going to be like, even in a full season, they might be like 15 homers, 8 steals. And it's like, that's useless to me. But if a guy's like, oh, in a full season, he's 30-20, but he's only going to get, you know, maybe 100 plate appearances. Like, okay, maybe that's like someone I'll take, see if he sticks out of spring training. If he doesn't, I can cut him. Like those are kind of like the playing time risks that you can take at the end of drafts.
Yeah, Carty, I would assume like, you know, even if you're, you know, using your projections as the Bible, it gets less impactful as the rounds go down, mainly because of the playing time conundrum of we don't know who is going to be up, who is going to have this spot. Is there going to be an injury, something like that? So it's, you know, that is why we take more shots the deeper we get, obviously, correct?
Yeah, depending on the format. In mixed leagues for sure, but that's one of the reasons why I hate mixed leagues, because I don't like doing that. But yeah, like the further down in the draft you go, obviously the less valuable the pick is, or the less valuable, you know, a $2 player auction is or whatever. And you can go for a higher variance guy, especially in a mixed league where if it doesn't pan out, you can replace them with somebody that's going to be pretty comparable. So deeper in the drafts, I'm more likely to, take a chance on a high upside guy, or God forbid a rookie. Oh my God.
No, not you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of everyone's stance, at least.
Sure.
It's pretty standard, and I don't have any problem doing that. Where I have a problem is taking Ellie De La Cruz in like the first or second round, because that's just stupid.
Yep.
I mean, I think this year specifically, I'd rather take Oneil Cruz later. You know what I mean? Like, if you want to go with the risk, that's what I would do this year.
We have Ellie De La Cruz at home, and it's Oneil Cruz.
That's right. Kyle just invented the perfect meme. Look at that. we have Cruz at home. Yeah, but it's Oneil. Yeah. It's not Ellie De La. Come on. I love it. Kyle, what is somewhat related to what we just talked about? How do you handle that floor upside? Is it just, look, I'm going to wait to take upside because I know what I'm going to get from the other players earlier? Are you taking, obviously, like Carty said, it may not be the most prudent move to take upside in the first or second round. Is there a round where you say, okay, this is where I can start? Do you have like a threshold like that at all? Obviously, things are different from year to year, but what do you think about, taking your risk? Where do you generally start taking risk?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be like lower down my starter lineup, whether that's offense or pitching. That like, I'm a big proponent of like, you can't win your league in the first round, but you can lose it. And for baseball, I'd probably extend that probably to like 5 or 6 rounds. That like, if you try and get smart, if you try and get clever, if you try and like bank on a guy's like ceiling, that can really bite you. And especially, that's kind of one of the things about fantasy is like, if you're like, oh, well, Ellie's going to steal me 50, 60 bases, but then he doesn't, you're in a huge hole. And it's like, you can't just make that up easily. So like getting that stability in like 5 category guys, like that's I'm a big proponent of that. I think it's, and that also makes it more fun later in the draft. You can start to choose those like specific guys of like your Joey Gallo's, like I need some power, so I'm going to choose Joey Gallo, and then you pair that with like a Jeff McNeil, like both of those guys like down the boards, maybe not Joey Gallo this year, but like just down the boards, like you take guys with distinct strengths and weaknesses and you can pair them together, and in aggregate they'll kind of add up to a better player, but you're taking it at a lower time in the draft where the risk isn't as high. And yeah, frankly, if they don't work out, you're also not relying on them. Like you've already got your rock solid production at the top. And then, yeah, that's when you can take the risks. Is like, I don't want to lead with risks. I want to lead with like floor, build the foundation first, and then you can get the nice Derek's apartment on top of that after.
Yeah, exactly. That's what happens when you make an ATM machine right there. Exactly. Carty, same question for you. When do you generally start taking risks? Because obviously you have to take them every single year. You have to take someone with upside. You can't sit on your hands and take all foundation all the way down, because you'll have a nice 5th place team in that. So you got to take a shot somewhere. When do you generally start taking shots?
I think the format is really important.
Let's say 15-man roto.
15-man roto mixed league, I assume we're talking here. Mm-hmm. Again, I don't play a lot of those. I play mostly AL, NL only because I think they're better and you don't have to worry about this. And I basically don't take shots. But if you're in 15-team roto mixed league, it's going to depend on format too. Like if it's an isolated league, you probably wait longer. If it's like an NFBC format, then I can kind of see the argument that people make. Oh, I got to take upside early because I'm shooting for the main event win or whatever. And like, all right, I guess I'm not going to tell you you're that stupid for taking Ellie Cruz in the second round or whatever. But like, for the most part, it is very dependent on the context of the league. And I definitely probably wait longer than most people do. The guys that I have the hardest time with not pulling the trigger on, and I'm curious how Kyle approaches these guys, is like the talented pitchers that can't stay healthy. Like I'm a sucker for Jacob deGrom. I'm a sucker for, in later rounds, Chris Sale. Like if he could just stay healthy and play a full season, he could be great.
I have Sale everywhere this year.
Like those guys, because projections always love those guys because projections have a hard time accounting for injuries and whether this guy's going to come back the same. It knows what he did before, and it's like he could be this good again. And so I have a hard time knowing, like, all right, which of these guys do I really want? Like, do I want to take a shot on Luis Severino? Like, what am I doing? And that's the kind of stuff that I struggle with in terms of upside, because those guys have the upside. But also the downside is there, and they never seem to stay healthy.
Yeah, look, the pitching is, and I think that's why you would probably, Carty, because you seem fairly conservative in your drafting. I think that's why you'd rather take the shot on pitching anyway, is because it's so variable from year to year, right? So that is where, if you're going to take a risk, take it in pitching because it is more variable. Kyle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think like it's pitching. There's inherently going to be some risk in. So like actually at the top end, and you'll see it in my projections too, but like Logan Webb's towards the top. And it's just because he's been kind of that workhorse, almost 200 innings every season kind of guy, but like he's still a pitcher. Like, so I like kind of internally those like accumulator pitchers, I discount them. And so like that to me kind of brings up those more like Glasnow types. I think he's probably still going a little above my preference, but like I'm a little bit more happy to kind of take a dart throw on a guy who's got the skills, and, you know, maybe he just stays healthy. And like, that's the other thing too about pitchers. And especially, you know, when Derek and I, we're tuned in, we're looking at all the stats, we're looking at all the pitchers all the time, basically, that it is just like, okay, my guy got hurt. Like, okay, where's a fill-in? Can I find like kind of that upside fill-in, you know, throw him on the IL. Okay, here's this rookie, maybe he sticks. Here's this, you know, other guy, he's playing against the Rockies at home, or against the Rockies out of course. And it's just like, you can make that playing time, you can make that up easier for pitchers than maybe you can for like a hitter. Like you can play matchups that you can stream starts, like that kind of thing. So I'm a little bit likelier to, like, my ideal draft comp is probably like at least the first 3 rounds hitters, just because their stability at the top is great. And then I'll lean into pitchers, and usually I can get some form of like a high upside guy around there, like maybe that people are a little bit questionable about, and then kind of work if I really am worried about like, oh, this is too much injury risk. Like, okay, you can get kind of a more innings eatery type, or like a Michael Wacha is a favorite of mine to kind of clean up at the end. Cause it's like, yeah, he doesn't throw hard, so his injury risk's a little lower. He's fine when he's out there. So it's just like, yeah, he'll help you kind of like buoy through those ups and downs of the more elite stuff, you know, higher upside, lower floor guys.
And when you're projecting them for a 5 ERA anyway, if he gives you a 6 ERA, you know, in a week, it doesn't even matter that much.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like over, you know, a 15-day IL, yeah, 4, 5, 6 ERA, like that's not going to do much. And I mean, even like some of your top of the line elite pitchers, they'll run a 2-week stretch of a 6 ERA. Like it happens. So It's not necessarily that big of a downside to have a guy go on the injured list for a short amount of time.
All right, I have a curveball to throw at you guys here. Carty, I just want to know, since you've been doing projections and you're deep in the numbers and everything, if you invented fantasy baseball today, let's say none of us have heard of it, we don't know what this is, you're making it right now, you're starting it. Obviously, mixed leagues are out. We're going AL and NL only.
Not allowed. No one is allowed to play it under my
That's
rule.
right. No mixing the leagues is what Carty says. So, but if you were, what stats would you make fantasy baseball run by? I doubt highly that it's the same 5 we're using right now for hitters and the same 5 for pitchers. So maybe for hitters, but I feel like pitching would be very different. If you were picking the 5 categories for hitting, 5 for pitching, which categories would they be? And would they just be the easiest to project? Because
no, they wouldn't be. I don't want the easiest to project, because then there's no edge. Everyone's going to have the same, you know, kind of, you know, projections, whether they're doing real projections or not. And, you know, there's not
Wednesday, right? Definitely.
Yeah. So, yeah, when I get asked this question, like, my answer is not what people expect. I'm kind of a traditionalist with this. Like, people say, oh, he's going to say WAR or linear weights, or like he's going to want something crazy. It's like, no, I'm cool. When Tout Wars switched over to OBP from batting average, I was like, I don't want that. I was one of the guys who's like, please don't do that. I want average still. The only one I would really throw away is saves, just because saves are so stupid. Because you can't project saves numerically anyway. It's like a manual thing. And they're so
You
stupid.
just said you didn't want the projectable stuff, though.
Well, I don't want the stuff that's completely unprojectable.
So what would you
Like
change it to?
literally unprojectable. Like you can't project saves.
Would you
like,
just
without
get
some
rid of
manual
saves
input.
as a stat in baseball if you could?
Yeah, 100% I get rid of saves as a stat in baseball. I mean,
Would you change it
teams
to
are almost
something else?
moving that
Would
way
you make it
anyway.
a different threshold? What would you do?
What's that?
Would you make it like, would you make a different threshold for a save? Like just change the parameters of it? Would you make it a whole different stat? Like what would you do? Like, so the relievers would have their own stat.
Listen, Bogman, you're asking me these questions. I haven't thought about it this in depth. You know what I know? Saves are stupid. That's what I know.
All right. Look, I did say it was going to be a curveball. So my bad. I'm digging on you, Carty. And yeah, you're like, I don't know. You just threw this question at me, dude. Come on. Kyle, same question for you. And you better have a good answer. Obviously, I'll scream at you. Like,
yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Like saves are the most overrated stat. That it's a manager stat, you know, that there's no other like really like even stolen bases guys get the green light, but it's like, oh, but that's not quite a save where it's like, oh, this is my 9th inning guy. And the manager's in charge of who gets to go get that save kind of thing. And like, I think that's stupid. Like it's one thing for wins to be, you know, how's the run scoring behind him? Like, oh, that's out of his control. But when it's like the entire stat is basically based around like, oh, is my team already winning? And does my manager trust me? Like that's so wonky to me.
Like wins are variant and annoying. But I still kind of like them, especially when variance is going my way.
When it's also
like, you don't like quality starts? Doesn't quality starts tell the story a little bit better about the starter?
Why do I first? No, we don't need to tell the story. This is a game that we made up at a restaurant 30 years ago. Like it doesn't matter. We don't have to mirror baseball perfectly. Like it just has to be fun. And
that's true.
I'm fine with wins. Like quality starts aren't even that much better. They don't tell the story that much better, and they're certainly not as fun. I don't know.
I think that's the thing too about like this is fantasy. You know, if you want to do like those historic sim leagues, that's all well and good, but like we're already making up of like, okay, it's a 12-team league with all MLB players. Like, okay, that's already completely different parameters.
Where in baseball do they count up your ranking in 12 different categories and give you points for them? And like, it's not like the whole thing is made up.
I agree with that. Yeah, the whole thing is made up. The only thing, if I'm starting, I like head-to-head leagues because I like to play against somebody every week. I also like the fact that what I did in April matters less in September and October. It's, you know, you get hot going in, you're the best team now, you should win. And I don't, you know, there's only one ring. There's a playoff. I understand.
I want what I do in April to matter just as much as later in the year.
I understand that you're a crybaby, but I am not. See, so I want to play someone. I want to talk some smack.
You want the chance to get lucky in the playoffs against the guys that are using projections. That's what you want.
This is just an attack against us.
You nailed it. That's exactly what I want. I want the dumb guy to be able to still win. No,
getting back to the leagues though, I like leagues where there are more avenues to win. So like saves and holds is fun because you obviously get those closers and they're usually really good for your ratios and strikeouts and they'll get you saves. But you can also get like a bunch of holds guys who, you know, may not have those gaudy strikeout totals, but like they still get leverage. Or like it would even be something like ISO is a category of like, yeah, you get your home run hitters will bump that up a lot, but then you also get like your guys who are more like a Freddie Freeman doubles type, or your guys in Boston that'll play those doubles off the green monster. And it's like, that just counts for a hit in normal, you know, roto in normal scoring. But it's just like, I think it's more interesting to me when there are more ways to be good. And then there's more ways to like, try to like solve the system of it's just like, okay, he's pursuing this strategy. He's pursuing this strategy. You know, it's like drafts are like that, but like, there's not a ton.
And that's why we don't have one
scoring.
Uniform type of league, right, Kyle?
Yeah.
It is because there should be different avenues to win, and there should be different games to be played. And like Carty said,
just not mixed leagues. That's what
we all came here for fun. That is why you first started playing fantasy. It wasn't to win money. It wasn't to game the system. It was for fun. That's why I like head to head. I like talking smack with my buddies on a week to week basis like that. That's why I enjoy the head to head, because it's more fun for me, and I win Roto more than I win head to head, by the way, because head to head is a lot of luck.
We'll check those receipts later.
Yeah. We don't need receipt checking here. We're just having a great time. We're about fun, right? And that was
I like that too. I like I've moved a couple times since high school and college when I started playing, and it's just like I'm still in those like home leagues from 2 homes ago, and so it's just like head to head especially is just like a good time. Talk some smack. Oh, how's the family? Like it's like it helps me be social, not just up here kind of in my office all day. Like, oh, I can talk to another human being that isn't a spreadsheet or a notebook.
I remember I hit it was like Friday, and I went to call my buddy, and my team had 23 homers on Friday. And before, I didn't even say hi or anything. He just said 23. What am I supposed to do? You know what I mean? Like that stuff is just so much fun. It makes me smile so much. But I think we only have like 5 or 6 minutes left here. Carty, do you want to give like a final thought on projections or anything that we missed in our talk here?
I mean, if it's not clear by now that you should be using projections or you're terrible, then let me say it. You should be using projections or you're terrible.
There you go. Short, sweet, simple. Kyle, what do you think?
Yeah, kind of jumping off what Derek said all day, like transparency is key. If people don't tell you or won't tell you what's in something, maybe you shouldn't trust them. And like everyone's like, oh, projections, it's so mathy, it takes the fun out of baseball. But part of it is like, well, how do you think people make rankings? That's just their internal projections, but like I have a more rigorous process for it,
That's what gets me. It's like, oh, you guys are using numbers. Oh, it's like, well, literally everyone is. We're just using better ones.
No offense, Nick. He's got the algorithm up here for his top 100, but I'm just like, well, I can tell you why these guys are my top 100. And it's like formulaic and top to bottom. Like he's good at this, he's bad at this. So I like that a little bit better. But yeah, like everyone does projections, whether they give you the whole spreadsheet or just the ranking.
I can tell you guys when one of the big moments for me in projections is I was talking to Ron Chandler at First Pitch Arizona. I think this was like 2017, 2016. I can't remember which year, but he was asking everyone in the room. It was like, all right, this hitter it was like, 31 stolen bases one year in 140 games. The next year he had 17. And he asked everyone like, what is this guy going to steal this year? And they said like 24, 23, because they split the difference. He goes, based on what? Based on what? You're just averaging it. That's all you're doing. So if you're using projections, you have these guys making these algorithms, these great formulas for you to use. And then because you don't like one number, you toss the whole thing away for a guy. No, that is better than you eyeballing it. It just is. So, while I'm not the biggest user of projections, you have to respect them. They're better than you eyeballing it every single time.
I like that point that you make so much, because so often like the anti-analytics or the anti-projection people, they find like that one example. It's like, well, you're about this guy, or you're not considering this one little thing that probably accounts for like 1% of the actual outcome. And it's like, well, cool. Projections aren't 100% perfect, but you just pulling something out of your ass is not any better. It's actually considerably worse.
Right. So, yeah. So that is, that was a big shift for me a long time ago. I'm not people use projections as the Bible. They're not that, but they also, are way better than eyeballing it and taking a random guess. So a lot of work goes into them, a lot of variables. Kyle, I just have one more question for you. Do you want to address the rumors that you talk to your spreadsheets that are being spread in the comments right now? Do you or do you not talk to your spreadsheets?
Oh yeah, just text to voice. Like they talk back too. It's great.
That's when it starts to get scary.
Yeah, there's a lot of yelling on my end. I'll tell you that much. There's a lot of frustration. Why doesn't this make sense?
Is there a guy there this year that you look at the numbers and you're like, what? How are we getting here? Is there a frustrating player to you where you're like, how do we get to this number for this guy? I don't understand it.
I feel like I'm down on Trey Turner a bit this year, and I'm just trying to now I'm going through and picking through okay, why? What am I don't think he's going to steal as many bags. I don't think he's not going to steal have 100% success rate again. That's obvious.
Right.
But I'm just like, why am I so low? And then it's, things of like, oh, why do I love Bailey Ober so much? Why do I love Michael Waka I talked about so much? And it's just like, some of these guys are like fine. Like, I think that's the thing is like, I end up being out on a lot of the hype guys. So like your Ellie De La Cruz, like those things. And so like, that's always going to be a flashy argument because everyone only ever trades on the upside. But then I'm just like at the other side, I'm just like, Nick will be like, oh, he's a Toby. And I'm like, but he's like a good Toby. And like that's useful. Like
Toby
that
plus is what we call that.
You can fill out your roster with that. Like that has value to it, And so I think those are always the ones where I'm just like because I mean, I want the Toolsy guys to perform well too. Like contrary to popular belief, I watch the games. But like I want to see like as much as I might not draft O'Neal Cruz, it was sick to watch him just rip off 120 mile an hour line drives, which weren't home runs, by the way, just FYI. But it is just like, watching Ellie do like steal second, third, and home on like 3 pitches. Like those things are awesome. And that's what makes baseball cool. But it's like, those are things that are also like, no one's going to be able to project that. And so, of course, my projections also aren't going to say that.
Yeah, you'd probably say that things that haven't happened in baseball before are not very projectable, right? Like that is definitely one of them. Carty, is there a guy in your projections this year that you agonize over that you're yelling at the spreadsheet as well? Like, why can't we get this numbers to where I want, or this number is way too high, or anything like that?
I mean, I love to know that I'm not the only one yelling at my computer, that Kyle's doing the same thing, because that definitely happens. Not necessarily at like a projection at a player, but just like in general, if I'm coding and like you're getting an error and it's just like, just work. I want to move on to the next part.
Or the echo of me yelling at me via the screen.
And the screen goes black and you just see your red face screaming at it. That's never
good. Screaming down. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't have projections done for this year yet. Next week, for real, next week.
Next week.
Yeah. But I don't have anything done yet, so I'm not sure how it feels about anyone yet.
All right. Yeah. So we'll be sure to try to book you next week for ITL, and you can be like, guys, one more week.
Guys, I need one more week.
Just one more week, guys. Come on. Just one more, please. Oh man, this is great. Like I said, anything else you guys want to add about projections? I know Nick is going to pop in here and boot us in a second, but Kyle, I'll start with you. Anything else that we skipped, we missed, anything that you think is important that the people need to hear?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's funny. It may not feel like it, but like there are people behind the projections, and like, I mean, I read a bunch of stuff. It's always happy to see the cool stuff, but we were talking about, oh, how'd you get this one player wrong? And my favorite thing is like, if you ask, or sometimes guys will even have articles and it's just like, oh yeah, like I don't, I'm not as confident in this projection. Or I think, everyone always does like, oh, these are the guys who I think can beat my own projections kind of thing. And so usually at the end of the season, it's always funny to see people be like, oh, he got that so wrong. And then you go back to the preseason. It's like, oh, he like knew that it might not, that like even this like particular guy was like, there are things that he couldn't quite put in the projection. So that it is just like, we try and take as much into account as we can, but like, yeah, we're not perfect. And like, that's the thing we were talking about, the beauty of fantasy baseball is it's just like, it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be like, for us, definitely good. Like that's a big one, but it's also like, yeah, sometimes it's interesting that like, at the end of the day too, like we're in this really awesome, very supportive industry, but it is just like, it's nice to be different from someone else and different from someone else. Cause now we can have a conversation and that helps you learn about, either the game of fantasy, that particular player, or like the overall game of baseball. Of like Nick and I going back and forth about the value of sinkers last offseason, like really helped me get a better understanding of like, okay, why is this pitch used this way? What are the goals of this versus the goals of something else? Like what makes something good? Like, I think those things are very interesting, and projections can kind of give you a baseline for that. Of like, you could be like, I agree with this, or I disagree with this, but like, that's the baseline. Like we're giving you kind of this thing to jump off of, this like starting point. And, if you agree, great. If you disagree, like,
just be respectful.
We'll talk. Yeah. Like I'm happy to be like, oh, I got that one wrong. That's on me. Or like, I didn't think of that. That's a really good idea. And so
I will make fun of you on Twitter.
That's right. Yeah. The good thing here, Carty,
things to realize with projections is that we know going into the year that a certain percentage of them are going to be wrong, whatever that means. Like if you think of a normal distribution, like most of the guys are going to fall in the middle. They're going to be like kind of close to the projections, but the guys on the tails, they're going to exist. Like we know, because the sample size we're dealing with, we know that we're going to be wrong on a certain percentage of guys. Don't know who they're going to be ahead of time, but pointing them after the fact and saying, you were so wrong about this guy. Like it means literally nothing.
Yep.
Nothing.
Blake Snell, he's going to win the Cy Young with the worst walk rate in the league. That'll happen sometimes.
Easily projectable. Everyone knows that stuff. So
Not the walk rate.